The one-day arrangement. Ethan Cole stood at Hannah Reed's doorstep with a proposal no respectable woman should accept: pretend to be his wife for one day, and he'd pay her more than a schoolteacher earned in 3 months. His 5-year-old daughter refused to attend the town's harvest gathering without a mother, and desperation had driven him to a stranger's door at dawn. What he didn't know was that Hannah Reed wasn't a stranger at all. She was the teacher his silent daughter had finally started speaking to, and what neither of them knew was that one day of pretending would unravel every carefully guarded secret they'd spent years protecting. Thank you for joining this story. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, please comment your city below so I can see how far this tale travels. And if this opening caught your attention, hit that like button. There's so much more ahead. The autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves through Dustvale's main street, where preparations for the annual harvest gathering had transformed the quiet ranch town into something almost festive. Bunting hung between storefronts, and the sound of hammer against nail echoed from the half-built dance platform in the town square. Children chased each other between wagons while their mothers arranged preserves and pies on long tables draped in checkered cloth. Ethan Cole watched it all from the shadow of the feed store awning, his daughter's small hand limp in his own. Molly hadn't said a word in 3 days. Not since he'd mentioned the gathering. Not since she'd learned that every other child would arrive with both parents, their families intact and whole, while she would stand beside only him, a father who could barely braid her hair properly, who burned her breakfast more often than not, who didn't know the words to the songs her mother used to sing. "We don't have to go," Ethan said quietly, crouching down to meet his daughter's gaze. "We can stay home. Just you and me. Like always." Molly's gray eyes, her mother's eyes, filled with tears that didn't fall. She was 5 years old and had already learned not to cry. The realization made something crack in Ethan's chest, a fresh break in the fault lines that had formed 2 years ago, when Sarah's fever had taken her in the space of a single, terrible week. "All the other children have mothers," Molly whispered finally, her voice so small he had to lean closer to hear it. "I want a mother too. Just for one day. Just so I'm not different." The words landed like stones in deep water, sinking into places Ethan had tried to keep sealed. He'd worked so hard to be enough for her, waking before dawn to prepare her meals, learning to sew the torn hems of her dresses, reading her the same 3 storybooks every night until he had them memorized. But he couldn't be both parents. He couldn't fill the space Sarah had left, no matter how many hours he spent trying. "Molly," he started, but she pulled her hand from his and walked away, her small boots scuffing against the wooden boardwalk. Ethan straightened slowly, his knees protesting. At 32, he felt decades older. The ranch work kept him strong, his shoulders broad, his hands calloused from rope and leather, but grief had carved lines into his face that made strangers guess him closer to 40. His dark hair, which Sarah used to run her fingers through, now fell too long over his collar because he couldn't remember when he'd last made time for the barber. He watched Molly settle on the bench outside the general store. Her body curled inward like she was trying to take up less space in the world. The sight of it made his hands clench into fists. For 2 years, he'd convinced himself that time would heal them both, that eventually the raw edges would smooth and they'd find their way back to something resembling normal. But Molly was retreating further into silence with each passing month, and Ethan was running out of ways to reach her. "Ethan Cole, you look like a man carrying the weight of Montana territory on those shoulders." He turned to find Reverend Thomas approaching, the older man's weathered face creased with concern. The Reverend had buried Sarah, had sat with Ethan through those first impossible weeks, had never stopped checking on them even when Ethan made it clear he wanted to be left alone. "Just thinking," Ethan said, which was true enough. "About the gathering?" The Reverend's gaze shifted to Molly. "I heard she's been having a hard time with it. She wants what she can't have." Ethan's voice came out rougher than he intended. "I can't conjure her mother back from the grave, no matter how much either of us wishes I could." The Reverend was quiet for a moment, watching the preparations continue around them. "You know," he said carefully, "there are women in this town who would be honored to accompany you both. Widow Morrison, for instance, or—" "No," the word came out sharp. I can't." Ethan stopped, frustration tightening his throat. How could he explain that the thought of standing beside another woman, of introducing her to his neighbors as if she could somehow replace Sarah, felt like a betrayal so profound he couldn't breathe around it? But watching Molly sit alone on that bench, he wondered if his loyalty to a ghost was its own kind of betrayal. The Reverend squeezed his shoulder once, then moved on, leaving Ethan alone with thoughts that circled like vultures. That night, after Molly had gone to bed without touching her dinner, Ethan sat at the kitchen table with Sarah's Bible open in front of him. He wasn't looking for spiritual guidance. He'd lost his faith somewhere between the doctor's grim prognosis and the first shovel of dirt hitting his wife's coffin. But Sarah had written in the margins, her neat script filling the white spaces with observations and prayers, and sometimes reading her words was the only way he could remember what her voice sounded like. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted," she'd written beside Psalm 34:18. Underneath, in different ink from a different year, sometimes closeness feels like distance. Sometimes silence feels like absence. Faith is continuing anyway. Ethan's thumb traced the words. Sarah had written that during her father's final illness, years before they'd met. She'd understood grief long before it came for her. He wondered what she would write now, what wisdom she'd offer about their daughter's pain, about the impossible choice between honoring the past and securing the future. The lantern flickered, casting shadows across the worn table. Through the window he could see the ranch stretching into darkness. 300 acres of grazing land, a sturdy barn, a house that had once been filled with laughter. Sarah's garden had gone wild, roses growing untamed over the fence she'd painted white. He hadn't had the heart to tear it down, or the energy to maintain it, so it stood as a monument to everything he'd failed to preserve. A sound from Molly's room pulled him from his thoughts. He found her sitting up in bed, her nightgown tangled around her legs, tears finally streaming down her face. "Hey, little bird." He sat on the edge of her bed, using the nickname Sarah had given her. "What's wrong?" "I miss Mama," Molly sobbed, the words breaking free like they'd been dammed up for weeks. "I miss her so much, and I can't remember her voice anymore. I try and try, but it's gone, Papa. Her voice is gone." Ethan pulled her into his arms, feeling her small body shake with the force of her grief. His own eyes burned, but he'd learned to keep his tears private, locked away where Molly wouldn't see them, and think his sorrow was one more thing she had to manage. "I know, sweetheart. I know." The words felt useless, inadequate against the size of her pain. "All the other children have mothers who will braid their hair for the gathering," Molly whispered against his chest, "who will fix their ribbons and tell them they look pretty. I don't want to go and be the only one who's different. I don't want everyone to look at me and feel sorry." And there it was, not just the absence of a mother, but the weight of being pitied, of being marked as less than whole in a town where everyone knew everyone's tragedies. Ethan held his daughter and made a decision born of desperation and love in equal measure. The next morning, he rode into town before sunrise, his plan forming with each mile. It was reckless. It was probably wrong, but watching Molly retreat into herself had become unbearable, and if one day of pretending could give her a few hours of feeling normal, of feeling whole, then he'd pay whatever price was asked. He just needed to find someone willing to accept it. Hannah Reed lived in a small house on the edge of town, the kind of dwelling that spoke of genteel poverty, clean curtains in the windows, a swept porch, but paint peeling from the shutters and a roof that had seen better decades. Ethan had never spoken to her directly, though he'd seen her around town. She'd arrived in Dustvale 6 months ago and taken the position of school teacher, replacing old Miss Pritchard, who'd finally retired after 40 years of terrorizing children with her ruler and her grammar lessons. He'd heard she was from back east somewhere, that she kept to herself, that she was quiet and competent and unremarkable in all the ways that helped a single woman avoid gossip in a small town. She was also, he'd learned from careful inquiry the previous evening, in need of money. Her mother was ill, requiring medicines that cost more than a teacher's salary could comfortably provide. Ethan knocked on her door just as the sun began to break over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. He heard movement inside, then footsteps, and then the door opened to reveal a woman in a simple gray dress, her dark hair pinned back from a face that managed to be both plain and quietly lovely in the morning light. Hannah Reed's eyes widened slightly at finding a man on her doorstep at such an hour, but she didn't step back or close the door. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and met his gaze directly. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice carrying the crisp edges of an Eastern education. "This is unexpected." "Miss Reed." He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I apologize for the early hour. I have—" He stopped, suddenly aware of how insane his proposal would sound spoken aloud. "I have a business proposition for you." Her dark eyebrows rose fractionally. "I see. Perhaps you should come in." The interior of her house was as neat as its exterior, sparse furniture, but everything clean and carefully arranged. Books lined makeshift shelves and a small writing desk sat by the window, papers stacked in precise piles. The scent of coffee and something baking, bread maybe, filled the air with an unexpected homeliness. Hannah gestured to a chair at her small kitchen table, then poured coffee into 2 cups without asking if he wanted any. The simple courtesy nearly undid his resolve. It had been so long since anyone had anticipated his needs, had moved through the small rituals of hospitality as if his presence mattered. "Now," she said, settling across from him with her own cup cradled in her hands. "What kind of business brings a cattle rancher to a schoolteacher's door before breakfast?" Ethan studied her over the rim of his cup. In the morning light, he could see faint shadows under her eyes that spoke of worry or sleepless nights, or both. Her hands, though clean and well-kept, showed signs of work, small cuts healed and healing, the kind you got from maintaining a household without help. "I need someone to pretend to be my wife for one day," he said, deciding directness was better than dancing around the truth. "For the harvest gathering this Saturday, I'll pay you 3 months of your teaching salary." The coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. For a long moment, Hannah Reed simply stared at him, her expression carefully neutral. Then she set the cup down with deliberate precision. "That is either the strangest proposition I've ever received, or you've mistaken me for someone else entirely," she said, her voice even. "I'm going to assume the former and ask for clarification before I show you the door." Fair enough, Ethan had expected this reaction, had prepared himself for it, but actually sitting across from her and trying to explain made him feel like a fool. "My daughter, Molly, refuses to attend the gathering without a mother. Every other child will have both parents there, and she—" His throat tightened. "She doesn't want to be different. She doesn't want to be pitied. I can't give her what she's asking for, but I thought if someone could just pretend, just for one day, she might—" He stopped, shaking his head. "It sounds insane when I say it aloud." Hannah's expression softened slightly. "Your daughter is Molly Cole, the small girl with gray eyes who sits in the second row and draws horses in the margins of her arithmetic papers." Ethan's head snapped up. "You know her?" "Mr. Cole, I teach her 6 hours a day, 5 days a week." Something flickered across Hannah's face, an emotion he couldn't quite name. "She's a lovely child, quiet, too quiet sometimes. But when she does speak, she's thoughtful and kind." She paused. "She's also deeply sad." The words landed with the force of confession, the kind of truth neighbors would whisper but never say directly. Ethan's hands tightened around his cup. "I know," he said roughly. "I know she's sad. I'm trying. I've been trying to help her, but nothing works. She just keeps pulling further away, and I don't know how to reach her anymore." Hannah was quiet, her gaze distant. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle. "Children who've lost a parent often feel like they're carrying a burden too heavy for their size. They worry about being too sad, about making the remaining parent sad, about not being enough to fill the space the missing person left behind." She focused on him again. "Your daughter doesn't need you to be both parents, Mr. Cole. She just needs to know it's okay to grieve without being alone in it." The insight cut through Ethan's defenses like a blade through soft wood. He'd been so focused on trying to be everything Sarah had been, gentle where he was rough, patient where he was quick-tempered, present in ways he didn't know how to be, that he'd never considered Molly might be doing the same thing. Both of them performing strength for each other, both of them drowning in private. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, the words scraping out of him. "I don't know how to be what she needs." "Most parents don't," Hannah said. "They just do their best and hope it's enough." She stood, moving to the window where early sunlight streamed through clean glass. "Why me, Mr. Cole? Surely there are women in town who would be honored to—" "Because you're a stranger," he interrupted. "Because Molly doesn't have any memories of you with her mother, doesn't have to carry the weight of comparison. And because—" He stopped, then forced himself to continue. "Because you need the money. I'm not offering charity or courtship or anything beyond a single day. It's a transaction, clean and simple." Hannah turned to face him, her arms crossed over her chest. "Nothing about this is clean or simple, Mr. Cole. You're asking me to lie to your daughter, to an entire town to stand beside you and pretend to be something I'm not. That's not a transaction. That's—" She stopped, her composure cracking slightly. "That's complicated in ways you haven't considered." "I know," Ethan said, rising to his feet. He pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. "But I'm asking anyway. That's half the payment, in advance. You can count it if you want, but it's all there. 3 months of your salary for 1 day of your time. Think about it, Miss Reed. I need an answer by Friday." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. "My daughter deserves 1 day where she feels like every other child in this town, where she doesn't have to carry the weight of being different. If you can give her that, I'll be in your debt for a lot more than money." He left before she could respond, stepping out into the morning that had gone from rose gold to bright, ordinary blue. Behind him, he heard the door close softly, and he wondered if he'd just made the worst mistake of his life or the only choice that might save his daughter from drowning in grief. Either way, he'd know by Friday. Hannah stood at her window and watched Ethan Cole ride away, his broad shoulders set in a line that suggested determination and despair in equal measure. On her table, the envelope sat like an accusation. She didn't need to count the money. She could feel its weight, could imagine the difference it would make, the medicines her mother needed, the debt to the doctor she could finally pay, the breathing room it would provide in a life lived perpetually on the edge of financial disaster. But money couldn't make the lie less complicated. Hannah sank into her chair and pressed her hands to her face. When she'd fled Boston 6 months ago, leaving behind the scandal that had destroyed her reputation and her engagement, she'd promised herself she would build a life based on truth. No more pretending, no more performing for others. Just honest work, honest living, honest existence in a place where no one knew what she'd been accused of. And now Ethan Cole was asking her to pretend to be his wife. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so painful. She thought of Molly Cole, that silent, watchful child who'd barely spoken during her first month of school. Hannah had worried about her, had tried gentle encouragement and patient waiting, had finally resorted to leaving drawing paper and colored pencils on Molly's desk during lunch. The drawings that had emerged were heartbreaking. A house with only 2 figures, a child standing apart from groups of other children, horses running free in fields where a tiny girl watched from behind a fence. Last week, Molly had finally spoken to her. Not about lessons or arithmetic, but about her mother. "Did you have a mother, Miss Reed?" the child had asked during recess while other children played games Molly never joined. "I do," Hannah had answered carefully. "She's very ill right now, but she's still with me." "You're lucky," Molly had whispered. "Mine is gone forever. Papa says she's in heaven, but I don't think heaven is real because if it was, Mama would find a way to come back to me." The logic had been childlike and devastating. Hannah had knelt beside Molly's desk, meeting those gray eyes that held too much understanding for such a young face. "I think," Hannah had said slowly, "that love doesn't end just because someone dies. I think your mother is still loving you, even from wherever she is. You just can't see it the same way anymore." Molly had considered this seriously. Like the sun behind clouds? Exactly like that. It had been a small breakthrough, but in the days since, Molly had begun speaking more. Not frequently, but enough that Hannah had felt hope. And now the child's father was asking Hannah to lie to her. Except, was it really lying if it gave Molly 1 day of peace? 1 day where she didn't have to be the pitied child, the motherless girl, the weight everyone carried with their sympathy? Children needed different things than adults. They needed to feel normal sometimes, to have their edges smoothed instead of constantly examined. Hannah opened the envelope and counted the money despite herself. It was all there, exactly as Ethan had promised. 3 months of salary she could put toward her mother's care, toward the specialist in Denver her local doctor had recommended, toward the possibility of more time. She thought about her mother, wasting away in a boarding house bedroom in Colorado Springs, alone except for the visits Hannah could afford once a month. She thought about the letters that arrived weekly, her mother's handwriting growing weaker, the words between the lines screaming what neither of them could say aloud. That time was running out, that money might buy more of it, that every choice now was a calculation between ethics and survival. "Damn you, Ethan Cole," Hannah whispered to the empty room. "Damn you for making this easy." Because it was easy, wasn't it? One day of pretending, one day of standing beside a man she didn't know and playing a role she'd never wanted, one day of being a lie in exchange for months of truth elsewhere. She'd done worse for less noble reasons. Hannah closed her eyes and remembered being 19, engaged to Marcus Pemberton, the rising young lawyer everyone said would be a senator someday. She'd believed she loved him, had believed he loved her, had never questioned the performance they'd created together. The perfect couple with the perfect future, everything polished and proper and precisely what Boston society expected. Until she'd discovered he was embezzling from his own clients, until she'd confronted him, until he'd accused her of the theft instead, turned his respected family's influence against her working-class background, painted her as the social climber who'd tried to destroy him when he'd discovered her crimes. No one had believed her. Why would they? Marcus Pemberton was from old money, old name, old respectability. Hannah Reed was a schoolmaster's daughter trying to rise above her station. She'd fled before the case went to trial, before she could be formally charged, before the whispers became shouts. Her mother had sold everything they owned to buy Hannah's train ticket west and enough money for a fresh start. A fresh start built on running away. Hannah opened her eyes and looked at the money again. If she did this, if she agreed to Ethan Cole's impossible proposal, she'd be choosing to help instead of hide. She'd be giving a grieving child one day of normalcy instead of taking something for herself. Maybe that was the difference. Maybe that's what made this choice different from every other lie she'd lived. Or maybe she was just desperate enough to justify anything. On Friday morning, Hannah walked to the address Ethan had given her, a ranch 3 miles outside town, accessible by a road that wound through grassland gone gold with autumn. She arrived to find a house that looked tired, a barn in good repair, and a small figure sitting on the porch steps. Molly Cole looked up when Hannah approached, her eyes widening in recognition. "Miss Reed?" the child said, confusion clear in her voice. "Why are you here?" Hannah's prepared speech died in her throat. She thought Ethan would have told his daughter, would have prepared her for this arrangement. But Molly's surprise suggested otherwise, and suddenly Hannah understood the full weight of what she'd agreed to. This wasn't going to be a simple transaction at all. The door opened and Ethan emerged, and the expression on his face when he saw Hannah told her he was as shocked to see her as Molly had been, but for entirely different reasons. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I wasn't expecting you until Saturday." "I came for clarification," Hannah said, her gaze moving between father and daughter. "About the exact nature of this arrangement. It seems we need to discuss logistics." Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes, followed by something that might have been relief or regret, or both. He looked down at Molly. "Little bird, why don't you go check on the horses? I need to speak with Miss Reed privately." Molly's gaze moved between them, clearly curious but obedient. She disappeared into the barn, and Ethan gestured for Hannah to follow him around the side of the house, out of earshot. "She doesn't know," Hannah said before he could speak. "You didn't tell her this was an arrangement." "No," Ethan admitted. I didn't want her to know she was being lied to. I wanted her to just have one day where it felt real." "So, what were you planning to tell her about why I'm suddenly here, playing your wife?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I don't know. I hadn't gotten that far in the plan. I just knew I needed to make this happen." Hannah studied him. This man who loved his daughter enough to hire a stranger, who was willing to lie if it meant protecting his child from pain, who clearly had no idea what he was actually doing. "Mr. Cole," she said quietly, "I came to tell you I'll do it, but not the way you planned." She took a breath. "Molly knows me. I'm her teacher. If I suddenly appear as your wife, she'll know something is wrong. Children aren't stupid, and that child is particularly perceptive." Then what do you suggest? Hannah looked toward the barn where Molly had disappeared. We tell her a version of the truth, that you've asked me to accompany you both to the gathering as a friend, someone to help with ribbons and dresses and the things you don't know how to do. We don't lie to her about what I am. She paused. We just let her believe what she wants to believe. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. And the town? Let them make their own assumptions. People see what they want to see, especially in small towns. If we arrive together, if I stand beside you, if you treat me with respect and… She hesitated. And affection, they'll assume we're courting, or more. We don't have to announce anything. We just have to not deny it. It was a compromise, a way to give Molly her day without the blatant deception Hannah's conscience couldn't accept. She waited for Ethan to reject it, to insist on his original plan, to tell her the deal was off if she wouldn't play the role exactly as scripted. Instead, he surprised her. All right, he said simply. We'll do it your way. Relief and anxiety hit Hannah in equal measure. She'd committed now, crossed the line from consideration to action. I'll need to be here early Saturday morning to help Molly get ready, to make it look natural. I'll have coffee waiting, Ethan said. Then, more quietly, thank you, Miss Reed. I know this isn't what you signed up for, but thank you. Hannah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned to leave, then paused. Mr. Cole? Whatever we tell Molly, whatever role we play, I need you to understand something. I won't make promises to your daughter that I can't keep. I won't let her believe in something that isn't real beyond this one day. If that's not acceptable to you, tell me now. Ethan met her gaze, and she saw something shift in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. That's acceptable. More than acceptable. It's right. As Hannah walked back down the road toward town, she wondered what she'd actually agreed to. One day of pretending for a child who desperately needed it. One day of standing beside a grieving man and his daughter and offering them a taste of wholeness they couldn't actually keep. One day that was already feeling more complicated than any amount of money could justify. Behind her, she didn't see Molly emerge from the barn and approach her father. Didn't hear the quiet question that would change everything. Papa, is Miss Reed going to be my new mama? And she didn't hear Ethan's careful, aching answer, would you like that, little bird? Or Molly's whispered response, so full of hope it nearly broke him. Yes, more than anything. Saturday morning arrived with a sky so clear and blue it hurt to look at. Hannah stood before her small mirror, adjusting the collar of her best dress, a deep green wool that had been her mother's, altered to fit Hannah's slighter frame. She'd pinned her hair more carefully than usual, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face instead of the severe style she typically wore to school. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened her mother's cameo brooch at her throat. This was madness, pure, reckless madness. The walk to the Cole ranch felt shorter than it had 2 days ago, as if the road itself was conspiring to deliver her to this impossible situation before she could change her mind. The sun had barely cleared the mountains when she arrived to find Ethan already outside, leaning against the porch railing with a cup of coffee in his hands. He straightened when he saw her, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. Miss Reed, he said, his voice still rough with mourning. You look… He stopped, seeming to catch himself. Coffee's ready, and Molly's been awake since dawn, too excited to sleep. Hannah climbed the porch steps, accepting the cup he offered. The coffee was strong and hot, and she wrapped her hands around the warmth to steady herself. Has she asked questions? Constantly. A hint of a smile touched Ethan's mouth. About why you're coming, what you'll wear, whether you know how to dance, if you like apple pie. He shook his head. I've never heard her talk so much. Before Hannah could respond, the door burst open and Molly appeared, still in her nightgown, her face bright with an emotion Hannah hadn't seen in the classroom, pure, unguarded joy. Miss Reed! The child launched herself at Hannah with enough force to make her stumble back a step. You came! Papa said you were coming, but I thought maybe it was a dream, but you're really here. Hannah's arms came around the small body automatically, her heart clenching at the desperate strength of Molly's embrace. Over the child's head, she met Ethan's gaze and saw her own uncertainty reflected back at her. They were already and deeper than either of them had anticipated. "I'm here," Hannah said softly, kneeling down to Molly's level. "And I heard you have a very important event today that requires proper hair ribbons and a dress that needs special attention." Molly nodded solemnly. "Papa tried to iron my dress yesterday, but he burned a hole in the sleeve. He said a very bad word when it happened." "Molly," Ethan's ears reddened. "It's all right," Hannah said, fighting back a smile. "Irons can be tricky. Why don't you show me this dress and we'll see what we can do?" She followed Molly into the house, leaving Ethan on the porch looking both relieved and somehow more anxious than before. The interior was exactly what Hannah had expected from a widower raising a child alone. Clean but cluttered, organized but worn, filled with the evidence of two people doing their best without quite knowing how. Dishes were stacked neatly by the sink, but dust gathered in corners. Furniture sat at slightly wrong angles, as if someone had moved it once and never adjusted it properly. On the mantel, a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and Molly's same delicate features watched over the room. Sarah Cole, the ghost they were all dancing around. Molly's bedroom was small but filled with light from an east-facing window. The burned dress lay across the bed, a beautiful thing in cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. The hole in the sleeve was small, barely noticeable, but Hannah could see it had devastated Ethan's attempts at competence. "I think," Hannah said carefully, examining the damage, "we can fix this. Do you have any ribbon that matches?" Molly's face lit up. "Mama had ribbons, lots of them. Papa packed them away, but I know where they are." She darted to the closet and emerged with a wooden box, its surface carved with flowers and vines. Hannah's breath caught when Molly opened it. Inside were spools of ribbon in every color, carefully organized, each one speaking of a woman who'd taken pleasure in small beauties. Tucked among them were other treasures, buttons and lace, small scissors with pearl handles, a thimble worn smooth with use. "Mama loved pretty things," Molly said quietly, running her fingers over a spool of blue silk. "Papa says I'm like her that way." Hannah swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "Then we'll use her prettiest ribbon to fix this dress. I think she'd like that." They worked together in companionable silence, Hannah carefully cutting away the burned fabric and replacing it with a ribbon band that actually improved the sleeve's appearance. Molly watched with intense concentration, occasionally offering observations or asking questions about stitching techniques. It was the most Hannah had ever heard her speak, and each word felt like a gift being offered tentatively, testing to see if it would be received with care. "Miss Reed?" Molly's voice went softer. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you going to be my mama now?" Hannah's needle stilled. She'd known this question was coming, had prepared herself for it during the sleepless hours of the previous night, but hearing it spoken aloud in Molly's hopeful voice made all her careful answers feel inadequate. "Sweetheart," she said slowly, setting down the sewing to give Molly her full attention, "I'm your teacher. I care about you very much. And today I'm here because your papa asked me to help make sure you have a wonderful time at the gathering." But you're not staying," Molly finished, her expression going carefully neutral in the way children learned when they'd been disappointed too many times. "It's just for today." "Yes." The word felt like a betrayal even though it was the truth. "Just for today." Molly nodded slowly, her fingers pleating the fabric of her nightgown. "That's what Papa said too, that you were being kind for just today." She looked up, and the wisdom in her gray eyes was heartbreaking. "But maybe if today is really good, there could be more days after." Hannah's heart cracked clean through. She reached out and cupped Molly's small face in her hands. "Maybe," she said, because she couldn't bring herself to take away all of the child's hope. "But for now, let's make today as wonderful as possible. Can we do that?" "Yes," Molly whispered. Then with more strength, "Yes, today can be perfect." They finished the dress and turned their attention to Molly's hair, which hadn't been properly brushed in what looked like several days. Hannah worked through the tangles with patient gentleness, feeling Molly gradually relax under her hands. This, she thought, was what the child had been missing. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but the simple intimacy of being cared for with attention and tenderness. "My mama used to sing when she did my hair," Molly said softly. Do you know any songs? Hannah did, dozens of them, learned from her own mother during childhood mornings just like this. She began to hum an old lullaby, then let the words come, her voice quiet but steady. Molly's eyes drifted half closed, and when Hannah glanced at the doorway, she found Ethan standing there, his expression stripped of all the careful guardedness he usually wore. He looked wrecked, grateful, terrified. Their eyes met, and Hannah saw the truth neither of them had wanted to acknowledge. This wasn't going to stay simple. It was already complicated, already woven through with emotions that had nothing to do with transactions or money or single days of pretending. "Papa!" Molly noticed her father and beamed. "Miss Reed fixed my dress, and she's making my hair beautiful, and she knows Mama's song." Ethan cleared his throat roughly. "I can see that. You look," his voice caught, "you look just like your mama did." The words hung in the air, heavy with grief and memory. Hannah tied off Molly's braid with a ribbon that matched the dress, then stood, suddenly needing space from the intimacy of the moment. "I should let you finish getting ready," she said. "I'll wait outside." But as she moved toward the door, Molly's voice stopped her. "Miss Reed, will you help me with my dress? Papa doesn't know how to do the buttons right." Hannah looked to Ethan, who nodded, something like relief crossing his face. So she stayed, helping Molly into the carefully mended dress, fastening each tiny button while Ethan retreated to give them privacy. When the child was finally ready, Hannah stepped back to assess her work. Molly stood before the small mirror, her reflection showing a girl transformed, hair neatly braided and ribboned, dress pressed and perfect, face glowing with an excitement that made her look less like a grief-shadowed 5-year-old and more like the child she should have been all along. "I look pretty," Molly whispered, wonder in her voice. "You look beautiful," Hannah corrected, "just like your mama." Molly turned and threw her arms around Hannah's waist. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for making today special." Hannah held her close, blinking back tears she hadn't expected. When she looked up, Ethan stood in the doorway again, now dressed in his best clothes, dark trousers, a pressed white shirt, a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. He'd shaved and trimmed his hair, and the transformation was striking. This was what he must have looked like before grief carved lines into his face, before he stopped caring about anything beyond survival. "We should go," he said, his voice rough. "Don't want to be late." The ride into town was awkward at first, all three of them crowded onto the bench of Ethan's wagon, Molly wedged between the adults like a living reminder of why they were doing this. But as they traveled, Molly's excitement became infectious. She pointed out landmarks, told stories about her schoolmates, asked Hannah questions about everything from constellations to whether horses dreamed. Hannah answered each question with care, aware of Ethan listening intently even as he managed the reins. Once, when Molly pointed out a hawk circling overhead, Hannah's explanation of hunting patterns made him glance at her with surprise. "My father was a naturalist," she explained, catching his look. "I grew up learning to observe." "What brought you west?" Ethan asked, the first personal question he'd posed. Hannah hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "A need for fresh starts. And distance from people who thought they knew my story better than I did." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "I know something about that." They didn't speak again until the town came into view, the main street already crowded with wagons and families dressed in their finest. Molly bounced with excitement, and Hannah felt her own stomach twist with anxiety. This was it. The moment they stepped into the performance, where the entire town would see them together and draw conclusions. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop near the town square, where the harvest gathering was already in full swing. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Children ran between adults in shrieking games of tag, and musicians tuned their instruments on the newly built platform. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread filled the air, mixing with wood smoke and autumn leaves. As Ethan helped Hannah down from the wagon, his hands steadying her at the waist, she saw heads turn. Conversations paused, eyes widened with interest and speculation. Widow Morrison, a woman who'd made her interest in Ethan painfully obvious over the past year, stood frozen with a pie in her hands, her expression shifting from shock to something harder. The Reverend's wife nudged her husband and whispered behind her hand. A cluster of women by the dessert table leaned together like birds on a wire, their gazes sharp with curiosity. Papa, Molly called, already running toward a group of children. Can I go play? Stay where I can see you, Ethan called back, then turned to Hannah. You ready for this? No, Hannah admitted, but I don't think that matters anymore. He offered his arm, the gesture formal but somehow intimate. Hannah placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, feeling the solid warmth of him through the fabric of his shirt. Together, they walked into the heart of the gathering, into the scrutiny and speculation and sudden understanding that this wasn't going to be a simple day of pretending at all. Reverend Thomas approached first, his weathered face creased with surprise and something that might have been approval. Ethan, Miss Reed, what a pleasant surprise to see you both here together. Reverend. Ethan's voice was steady, giving nothing away. Beautiful day for a gathering. Indeed it is. The Reverend's gaze moved between them with open curiosity. I wasn't aware you two were... He paused delicately. Acquainted. Miss Reed has been kind enough to help with Molly, Ethan said, which was true enough to not feel like a complete lie. Seemed right to invite her to join us today. How wonderful! The Reverend's wife appeared at her husband's elbow, her smile warm but her eyes calculating. It's so good to see Ethan finally, well... She caught herself. I'm sure Molly is thrilled to have such lovely company. Hannah felt the weight of their assumptions, the conclusions being drawn from simple proximity and a hand resting on an arm. She could correct them, could explain this was nothing more than a favor, could protect herself from being woven into town gossip. But one glance at Molly, who was laughing with other children and pointing back at them with obvious pride, made Hannah swallow her explanations. Molly is a remarkable child, Hannah said instead. It's my pleasure to be here with her and Mr. Cole. More people approached as the morning progressed, each conversation a careful dance of questions asked and not quite answered, assumptions made and not corrected. Widow Morrison cornered Hannah near the dessert table, her smile sharp as broken glass. Such a surprise to see you here with Ethan, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I wasn't aware you were the type to pursue widowers. Hannah met her gaze evenly. I wasn't aware I needed to justify my friendships to anyone. Of course not, dear. The older woman's eyes narrowed. Though in a town this size, people do talk, especially about women who arrive from nowhere with mysterious pasts and no references beyond a single letter. The threat was barely veiled. Hannah felt her spine straighten, the old defensiveness rising. But before she could respond, Ethan appeared at her side, his presence solid and somehow protective. Mrs. Morrison, he said, his tone carefully polite, I believe they're about to start the pie judging. Wouldn't want you to miss presenting yours. The widow's gaze moved between them, frustration clear on her face. Of course. Good luck today, Mr. Cole, Miss Reed. She swept away, leaving tension in her wake. She's not happy with me, Ethan said quietly. I noticed. Hannah watched the woman disappear into the crowd. Should I be worried? Ellen Morrison is all bark and no bite, and her opinion matters less to me than Molly's happiness. He glanced across the square to where his daughter was helping younger children bob for apples, her earlier isolation forgotten in the chaos of play. Look at her. I haven't seen her smile like that since... He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. Hannah saw it too. The transformation in Molly, the way she moved with confidence instead of uncertainty, the way she laughed without restraint. Whether it was Hannah's presence or simply permission to be happy, something had shifted in the child. Dance with me, Ethan said suddenly. Hannah startled. What? The music's starting, people are watching, and if we're going to do this... He held out his hand. We should do it properly. The musicians had indeed begun to play, a fiddle and guitar combining in a lively tune that had couples moving toward the dance platform. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. Dancing meant touching, meant closeness, meant performing an intimacy she wasn't sure she could fake convincingly. But Ethan's hand remained outstretched, steady and waiting, and around them people were definitely watching. Hannah placed her hand in his. He led her to the platform, his grip firm but not demanding, and when they took their positions among the other couples, Hannah felt the full weight of what they were doing. This wasn't sitting beside each other at church or walking arm in arm through a crowd. This was active performance, bodies moving together, faces close enough to see every flicker of emotion. The dance was a simple reel, familiar enough that Hannah's feet found the steps without conscious thought. Ethan moved with surprising grace for a man his size, guiding her through turns and passes with a confidence that suggested he'd done this before. In another life, when dancing with his wife had been commonplace. "You're good at this," Hannah said, slightly breathless as they came together and parted in the pattern. Sarah loved to dance. His voice was quiet, meant only for her. "I learned because it made her happy." The honesty of it, the way he didn't hide his grief or pretend this wasn't complicated, made something shift in Hannah's chest. She'd expected awkwardness, performance, distance maintained through careful formality. Instead, she found genuine connection, two people moving through the same steps of loss and trying. When the dance ended and Ethan's hand lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, Hannah realized the danger she was in. Not from him, but from herself. From the way his presence felt solid and safe, from the way Molly's laughter made her heart ache with belonging, from the way she could too easily imagine this being real instead of borrowed. "Papa, Miss Reed!" Molly came running up, cheeks flushed from playing. "There's going to be a sack race. Can we all do it together? Please?" Ethan looked at Hannah, question in his eyes. She should say no. Should maintain boundaries, should remember this was temporary, should protect her heart from getting any more tangled in this impossible situation. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Let's do it." The sack race was chaos. Adults and children alike hopping across the grass in burlap bags, falling and laughing and cheering each other on. Molly's team won, and her triumphant shriek when the Reverend announced them as victors was the purest sound Hannah had ever heard. The child threw herself at both Hannah and Ethan simultaneously, creating a tangle of limbs and laughter that felt achingly like family. As the afternoon wore on, Hannah found herself slipping deeper into the role she'd agreed to play. She helped serve food alongside the other women, accepting their careful questions with vague answers that satisfied without revealing much. She watched Ethan interact with other men, noting how they treated him with respect but also distance, as if his grief had built walls they didn't know how to cross. She saw how those walls lowered slightly when he looked at Molly, and how they lowered even more when his gaze found Hannah across the crowd. When the sun began to set and lanterns were lit around the square, the musicians struck up a slower tune. Couples moved together in the golden light, and Molly appeared at Hannah's side with eyes full of pleading. "Will you dance with Papa again, please? Everyone else is dancing with their families." "What?" How could she say no to that? Hannah let Molly lead her to where Ethan stood talking with the blacksmith, watched the child tug on her father's sleeve with such earnest hope that he could only smile and extend his hand once more. This dance was different, slower, more intimate, requiring them to stay close as the music wove around them. Ethan's hand at Hannah's waist felt familiar now instead of foreign, and when she looked up to find him already watching her, something passed between them that had nothing to do with pretending. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for all of this. For her. I know it's more than you bargained for. It's more than both of us bargained for," Hannah admitted. "But I'm not sorry I came. Neither am I." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Even though I know it makes Monday morning complicated." Monday. When she'd go back to being Miss Reed the school teacher, and Molly would be just another student, and this golden afternoon would become a memory they'd all have to figure out how to carry. "We'll manage," Hannah said, with more confidence than she felt. The dance ended, but before they could separate, Molly appeared between them and grabbed both their hands. "Can we stay for the fireworks?" she asked. "Please, I want to watch them with both of you." Ethan looked at Hannah over his daughter's head, and she saw the same conflict she felt. The knowledge that every minute they stayed was another minute of pretending that would make the truth harder to return to, balanced against the impossible sweetness of this stolen time. "Yes," Hannah said, "we can stay for the fireworks." They found a spot on the grass at the edge of the square. Molly settled between them with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the cooling evening air. As darkness fell and the first burst of light exploded across the sky, Molly leaned against Hannah's shoulder with a sigh of pure contentment. "This is the best day of my whole life," the child whispered. "I wish it could be like this always." Hannah's throat tightened. She felt Ethan's gaze on her, heavy with things neither of them could say. Around them, families clustered together. Children squealed at each colorful explosion, and the night air filled with the smell of sulfur and celebration. This wasn't real. This was borrowed time, a single day purchased with money and desperation. Come tomorrow, Hannah would return to her small house on the edge of town. Ethan would go back to his ranch, and Molly would have to accept that what felt like family was only an illusion created for her benefit. But as another firework bloomed across the sky and Molly's small hand found hers in the darkness, Hannah couldn't bring herself to pull away. For tonight, for these last few hours, she would let herself pretend too. She would let herself imagine what it might feel like to belong to these two people. To have this tired, grieving man look at her like she mattered. To have this remarkable child trust her with dreams too fragile to speak aloud. Tomorrow would come soon enough, with all its complications and consequences. Tonight, she would just hold on. The fireworks finale lit up the sky in cascades of gold and silver, and in the flickering light, Hannah saw Molly's face turned upward, eyes wide with wonder. She also saw Ethan watching not the sky, but his daughter, and the expression on his face was so full of love and pain that Hannah had to look away. When the last spark faded and the crowd began to disperse, Molly had fallen asleep against Hannah's shoulder, her small body heavy with exhaustion and contentment. Ethan carefully lifted her, cradling her against his chest, and Hannah gathered the blanket they'd been sitting on. They walked to the wagon in silence, the town square emptying around them. People called out goodbyes, made knowing comments about what a lovely family they made, wished them well with smiles that held assumptions Hannah and Ethan didn't correct. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, Molly sleeping between them, the darkness broken only by moonlight and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. When they finally arrived, Ethan carried his daughter inside while Hannah waited on the porch, suddenly uncertain of her place in this ending. He emerged a few minutes later, closing the door softly behind him. "She didn't even wake up when I put her to bed," he said, moving to stand beside Hannah at the railing. "She hasn't slept that peacefully in 2 years." "It was a good day for her," Hannah said carefully. "It was a good day for all of us." Ethan turned to face her, and in the moonlight his expression was raw. "Hannah, Miss Reed, I don't know how to thank you for what you gave her today. What you gave both of us." "You don't need to thank me. We had an agreement." But the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. "It stopped being just an agreement somewhere between the hair ribbons and the fireworks," Ethan said quietly. "We both know that." Hannah's breath caught. She should deny it, should maintain the fiction that this had been a transaction cleanly executed, should protect them both from acknowledging what had actually happened. "Yes," she whispered instead. "I know." They stood in silence, the weight of confession hanging between them. Finally, Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, the second half of their payment. "I won't take it," Hannah said immediately. "You earned it, more than earned it." "I didn't do this for money." The truth escaped before she could stop it. "Not entirely. Not by the end." Ethan studied her face in the moonlight, and what he saw there made him set the envelope on the porch railing between them, neither forcing it on her nor taking it back, just leaving it there as a decision she could make when she was ready. "What happens now?" he asked. "I don't know." Hannah wrapped her arms around herself against the night chill. "Monday, I go back to being Molly's teacher. You go back to being just another parent. We pretend today didn't complicate everything. And if I don't want to pretend?" His voice was rough with something that sounded like hope and fear combined. Hannah's heart hammered. "Ethan, I know it's too soon. I know one day doesn't mean anything real. I know I'm probably a fool for even thinking—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "But Molly hasn't been that happy in 2 years, and I haven't felt that alive in just as long. And if there's even a chance that this could be more than borrowed time, don't." Hannah held up a hand, panic rising. "Don't ask me for things I can't give. Don't make this into something it wasn't supposed to be." "What if it already is?" The question hung in the night air, impossible and tempting and terrifying. Hannah thought about her mother wasting away in Colorado Springs, about the money she still desperately needed, about the scandal she'd fled, and the fresh start she'd promised herself. She thought about Molly's face lighting up when Hannah had arrived that morning, about the weight of the child sleeping against her shoulder, about how easily she could imagine doing this again and again until it became real. "I can't," she said, the words breaking. "I can't let myself want this. I can't let Molly believe in something that might not last. I can't—" Her voice caught. "I came here to escape people who thought they knew my story. I can't become someone else's story all over again." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. "What if you got to write your own story this time?" The question was so gentle, so full of possibility, that it nearly undid her. But Hannah had learned the hard way that hope was dangerous, that wanting led to pain, that the best way to protect yourself was to never let yourself imagine more than what you already had. "I should go," she said, moving toward the porch steps. "Hannah." Ethan's voice stopped her. "At least take the money. Whatever you decide about anything else, you earned it. Your mother needs it." She turned back, surprised. "How did you know about my mother?" "Small town. People talk, and I pay attention when it matters." He picked up the envelope and held it out. "Take it, please." Hannah hesitated, then accepted it, her fingers brushing his in the exchange. The touch sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with money or arrangements or pretending. "Thank you," she whispered. "Will you—" Ethan stopped, then tried again. "Will you at least think about it? About whether this has to end with today?" Hannah looked at him standing in the moonlight. This man who loved his daughter enough to hire a stranger, who danced with her like she mattered, who was brave enough to ask for more even knowing she might refuse. "I'll think about it," she said, because it was the only honest answer she could give. She walked down the road toward town, the envelope heavy in her pocket, her heart heavier still. Behind her, she knew Ethan stood on the porch watching her go, and inside the house, Molly slept peacefully, dreaming of a day when pretending had felt like truth. Tomorrow would bring clarity or confusion, or both. Tomorrow, Hannah would have to decide whether to protect her heart or risk it on the impossible hope that one day could become forever. But tonight, she just walked through the darkness, letting herself remember how it had felt to belong, even if only for stolen hours that now felt more precious than anything she could buy with borrowed time and desperate bargains. The envelope sat on Hannah's kitchen table for 3 days, unopened. She'd placed it there Sunday morning and then spent the rest of the weekend avoiding it, as if the money inside carried a weight beyond its monetary value. Every time she walked past, she felt Ethan's question echo in her mind. What if this could be more than borrowed time? Monday morning arrived with rain, the kind of steady autumn drizzle that turned dirt roads to mud and made the world feel smaller, more enclosed. Hannah dressed for school with extra care, her hands fumbling with buttons and hairpins as anxiety twisted in her stomach. She'd see Molly today. She'd have to look into those gray eyes and pretend Saturday had been nothing more than a pleasant outing, a favor completed and filed away. The lie tasted bitter even in her thoughts. The schoolhouse was already filled with children when she arrived, their voices creating the familiar chaos of a Monday morning. Hannah hung her damp cloak and moved to her desk, organizing papers with movements made automatic by routine. She felt the moment Molly entered the room, a shift in the air, a sudden awareness that made her skin prickle. The child stood in the doorway, water dripping from her coat, her eyes searching until they found Hannah's. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Molly smiled, bright and uncomplicated, and walked to her desk in the second row as if everything was perfectly normal. Hannah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The morning passed in the usual rhythm of lessons and recitations, spelling words and arithmetic problems scratched on slate boards. Molly participated more than she had in previous weeks, raising her hand to answer questions, helping younger students with their letters during practice time. The other children seemed to sense something different about her, too. Several invited her to join their games during recess, invitations Molly accepted with a hesitant pleasure that made Hannah's chest ache. At lunch, while the other children ate outside under the schoolhouse eaves despite the rain, Molly approached Hannah's desk with careful steps. "Miss Reed?" Her voice was quiet, uncertain. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course, sweetheart." Hannah set down the paper she'd been grading. "What's on your mind?" Molly twisted her hands together, her lunch pail forgotten. "Is Saturday?" She stopped, started again. Was Saturday real? The question cut straight to the bone. Hannah wanted to lie, to offer the easy answer that would protect them both. But she'd promised herself honesty, and Molly deserved nothing less. Parts of it were real, Hannah said carefully. The time we spent together, the way you looked in your dress, the fun we had, all of that was real. Your feelings were real, and so were mine. But you're not going to be my mama. It wasn't a question. Oh, Molly. Hannah came around the desk and knelt beside the child's chair. It's more complicated than that. Your papa and I, we don't know each other well enough to make those kinds of promises. Saturday was wonderful, but it was also just one day. Molly's eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. Papa said maybe there could be more days, if you wanted them. Hannah's heart stumbled. He said that? He talks to Mama's picture at night when he thinks I'm sleeping. Molly's voice dropped to a whisper. He told her about you. He said maybe it was okay to feel happy again, if she wouldn't be mad at him. The image of Ethan having conversations with his dead wife's photograph, seeking permission to move forward, asking forgiveness for feeling something beyond grief, it was almost more than Hannah could bear. Your papa is a good man, Hannah managed, and he loves you very much. But do you love us? Molly asked, her child's directness cutting through all adult equivocation. Even a little? Hannah looked into those gray eyes and knew she couldn't lie. Yes, she whispered, even more than a little. But love isn't always enough, sweetheart. Sometimes life is more complicated than our feelings. Molly processed this with the seriousness of someone far older than 5. Papa says complicated things just take more work, like training horses or fixing fences. Despite everything, Hannah felt a smile tug at her lips. Your papa would say that, wouldn't he? Will you come visit us again, even if it's complicated? Before Hannah could answer, the schoolhouse door banged open and the other children tumbled back inside, bringing cold air and the smell of rain with them. The moment shattered and Molly returned to her desk, leaving Hannah kneeling beside an empty chair with her heart in pieces. The afternoon dragged. Hannah heard herself teaching through a fog of distraction, her mind circling endlessly around impossible questions. When the final bell rang and children scattered into the rainy afternoon, Molly lingered at her desk, carefully packing her slate and books. Molly, your papa will be waiting, Hannah prompted gently. He said I could walk today. It's not far. The child shouldered her bag, then paused. Miss Reed, thank you for Saturday. It was the best day I can remember. She left before Hannah could respond, the door closing softly behind her. Through the window, Hannah watched her small figure disappear down the muddy road, and something in her chest pulled tight with longing and fear in equal measure. That evening, Hannah finally opened the envelope. The money was all there, exactly as promised. 3 months' salary that would pay for her mother's medicines, the specialist in Denver, maybe even a visit that lasted longer than an afternoon. She counted it twice, then sat staring at the bills spread across her table. This was what she'd agreed to. A transaction. A favor in exchange for payment. Clean and simple, Ethan had said, though nothing about any of this felt clean or simple anymore. She thought about her mother, about the last letter that had arrived with handwriting so shaky Hannah had barely been able to read it, about the careful way her mother had written that she was fine, everything was fine, not to worry, all the coded language they used to avoid speaking the truth directly. Her mother was dying, not quickly but steadily, and every day without proper treatment hastened the inevitable. This money could buy time. Not forever, but more than they had without it. Hannah closed her eyes and made a decision. The next morning, she sent a telegram to Colorado Springs, arranging for her mother to see the specialist. She paid the doctor's outstanding bills. She set aside enough for a train ticket to visit next month. And when all of that was done, a small portion remained, enough that she wouldn't have to worry about heating oil for the winter or whether she could afford eggs with her bread. She should have felt relieved, grateful, free from the financial anxiety that had haunted her for months. Instead, she felt hollow. Wednesday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to the schoolhouse. Hannah was cleaning slates after dismissal when a knock sounded at the door. She turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway, hat in hands, looking uncomfortable and determined in equal measure. Mr. Cole, her voice came out steadier than she felt. Is everything all right? Is Molly? Molly's fine. She's with Reverend Thomas's wife, helping bake pies for the church social. He stepped inside, water dripping from his coat. I came to talk to you. Hannah set down the slate she'd been holding, her hands suddenly unsteady. I see. I know this is probably inappropriate, coming to your workplace like this, but I've been trying to figure out the right way to say what I need to say, and I finally realized there isn't a right way. There's just the honest way. He moved further into the room, his size making the schoolhouse feel smaller. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion barely contained. Saturday changed something in Molly. She's been talking more, sleeping better, even eating properly. Yesterday she sang while she was doing chores, actually sang, Hannah. I hadn't heard her sing since Sarah died. He stopped, swallowing hard. And it's not just her. I can't stop thinking about how it felt to have someone else at the table, someone to share the small moments with. The way you fixed her dress with Sarah's ribbons instead of throwing it away. The way you knew that song she used to love. The way you looked at me during the fireworks like… He broke off, shaking his head. I'm making a mess of this. No, Hannah said softly. You're not. I know one day doesn't mean we know each other. I know you have your own life, your own reasons for being here that have nothing to do with me or Molly. But I'm asking anyway. He met her gaze directly. I'm asking if you'd consider giving us more than one day. Not marriage or promises neither of us are ready for. Just time. A chance to see if what we felt on Saturday could grow into something real. Hannah's throat tightened. Ethan, I told you. I know what you told me. That you can't let yourself want this. That you came here to escape other people's stories. He took a step closer. But what if this isn't someone else's story? What if it's yours, and you get to decide how it goes? You don't understand. Hannah wrapped her arms around herself. I can't. The words tangled in her throat, all the things she couldn't say. About Marcus and the accusations that had destroyed her reputation. About fleeing Boston in disgrace. About building her life on the foundation of being forgettable, unremarkable, beneath notice. Then help me understand, Ethan said quietly. Talk to me, Hannah. Tell me why you're so afraid of something that could make all three of us happy. The gentleness in his voice broke something loose in her chest. She turned away, moving to the window where rain streaked the glass in silver rivulets. I was engaged once, she heard herself say, to a lawyer in Boston, Marcus Pemberton, from a very old, very respected family. Everyone said we were perfect together, the ambitious young attorney and the schoolmaster's daughter who'd learned to act like she belonged in drawing rooms and society dinners. Her hands clenched on the windowsill. I thought I loved him. I thought he loved me. I was wrong about both. She felt rather than saw Ethan move closer, his presence solid behind her. He was stealing from his clients, she continued, the words coming faster now that she'd started. Embezzling funds from estates he managed, using his family's reputation to deflect suspicion. I found the ledgers by accident, saw the discrepancies. When I confronted him, her voice caught. He accused me instead. Told his family and the authorities that I'd been stealing, that I'd tried to blame him when I was caught. His family believed him, the police believed him, everyone believed him, because why would Marcus Pemberton risk his future for money he didn't need when Hannah Reed, the social climber, had every reason to want more than she deserved? Hannah, I fled before it went to trial. My mother sold everything we owned to buy my train ticket and a new start out west. I came here to disappear, to be no one, to never again be the center of someone's story or scandal or speculation. She finally turned to face him, tears streaming down her face unchecked. And then you asked me to stand beside you in front of the whole town, to let them think we were courting or married or whatever assumptions their minds created. Do you know what that felt like, to be seen again, to be noticed and judged and made into gossip? Ethan's expression had gone still, intense. Did it feel like Boston? No, Hannah admitted, the word breaking. That's what terrifies me. It felt like belonging, and I don't know how to trust that anymore. The silence stretched between them, filled only with rain against the roof and Hannah's ragged breathing. Then Ethan moved, closing the distance between them and taking her hands in his. I can't promise you won't get hurt, he said quietly. I can't promise this town won't talk, or that some people won't judge, or that loving us won't be complicated and messy, and sometimes painful. But I can promise you this. I will never lie to you, never blame you for my mistakes, never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. And neither will Molly. How can you promise that? Hannah whispered. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you fixed my daughter's dress with her dead mother's ribbons instead of replacing it with something new. I know you sang a song that made Molly cry happy tears. I know you danced with me like it mattered, and you held my daughter while she slept like she was precious to you. His hands tightened on hers. I know that when I look at you, I see someone brave enough to run toward a new life instead of just away from an old one. That's enough to start with. Hannah searched his face, looking for deception or delusion or the easy promises men made when they wanted something. Instead, she found only honesty, raw and uncertain, and completely genuine. I'm afraid, she admitted. So am I, Ethan said. I'm terrified that I'm asking too much too soon, that I'll scare you away, that Molly will get attached and then lose someone else she loves. But I'm more afraid of not trying, of letting you walk away because I was too scared to ask you to stay. This is insane. We've spent one day together. Then spend another day with us, and another after that. No expectations, no promises beyond what we're ready for. Just time. Hannah knew she should refuse, should protect herself, protect her carefully rebuilt life, protect her heart from the risk of being broken all over again. But standing there with Ethan's hands warm around hers, with the memory of Molly's joy still fresh, and the weight of loneliness suddenly too heavy to carry alone, she found herself wanting to be brave instead of safe. What would it look like? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever this is? Relief flooded Ethan's face. Whatever we want it to look like. Sunday dinners, maybe. Or you could come to the ranch after school sometimes, help Molly with her lessons. I could court you properly if you want, flowers and proper calls and chaperones, or we could just spend time together and see where it goes. The town will talk. Let them talk. As long as we know the truth, their stories don't matter. It was such a simple statement, but it carried the weight of revolution. All her life, Hannah had shaped herself around other people's stories, becoming what her mother hoped, what Marcus wanted, what Boston society expected. And when those stories had turned against her, she'd fled rather than fight. Let other people's narratives define who she was and what she deserved. What if Ethan was right? What if she got to write her own story this time? I need to think about it, Hannah said, but her voice had softened, the edge of panic dulling into something more like possibility. Take all the time you need. Ethan released her hand slowly, as if reluctant to let go. I'm not going anywhere, Hannah, neither is Molly. Whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, we'll be waiting. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. For what it's worth, I think you're brave. Not because you ran from Boston, but because you're still here, still teaching, still trying despite everything that happened. That takes more courage than most people ever manage. He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Hannah stood alone in the empty schoolhouse, rain drumming on the roof, Ethan's words echoing in the silence. That evening, she pulled out paper and pen and began a letter to her mother. Not the careful, edited version she usually wrote, but the truth. About Ethan and Molly, about Saturday, about being offered a chance at something real and being terrified to take it. Her mother's response arrived 10 days later, her handwriting stronger thanks to the new medicines the specialist had prescribed. Hannah opened it with trembling hands, knowing her mother's opinion mattered more than anyone else's. My dearest Hannah, the letter began. Your news filled me with more joy than I've felt in months. Not because you've found a man, you don't need a man to be complete, but because you've found the courage to want something again. Do you know how much that means to me? To know that Boston didn't break you completely, that you still have the capacity to hope? You asked for my advice, so here it is. Be careful, yes. Protect yourself, absolutely. But don't confuse protection with isolation. Love always carries risk. The question is whether the risk is worth the potential reward. Only you can answer that. But I will tell you this. In all your careful letters over the past 6 months, you've never mentioned friends or joy or anything that suggested you were living instead of just surviving. This letter is different. This letter sounds like life. Whatever you decide, I support you. But please, darling girl, don't let fear make your choices. You've already lost too much to fear. Don't lose this too. Hannah read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her mother was right. She'd been surviving, not living. She'd built a life of safety and isolation, convinced it was what she needed, never acknowledging how lonely it made her. On Sunday, she walked to the Cole ranch without being invited. Ethan answered her knock, surprise and hope warring on his face. "Hannah?" "I'd like to stay for dinner," she said before she could lose her nerve. "If the invitation is still open." His slow smile felt like sunrise. "It's always open." Molly appeared behind her father, and the child's face lit up like lanterns. "Miss Reed, you came back!" "I did," Hannah said, her voice catching. "If that's all right with you." "It's more than all right," Molly said, grabbing Hannah's hand and pulling her inside. "Papa burned the biscuits again, so you probably need to help." The evening passed in a blur of ordinary moments that felt extraordinary. Cooking dinner together in the small kitchen, Molly chattering about school while Ethan salvaged the burned biscuits, sitting down to eat at a table that suddenly felt less empty. After dinner, Hannah helped Molly with her reading while Ethan washed dishes, and when the child's eyes started to droop, Hannah found herself following them through the nighttime routine of toothbrushing and nightgown finding without being asked. "Will you sing?" Molly asked when she was tucked into bed. "The song from before?" Hannah glanced at Ethan, who stood in the doorway watching them with an expression she couldn't quite read. He nodded slightly, and Hannah settled on the edge of Molly's bed and sang the lullaby her own mother had sung to her, her voice soft in the lamp-lit room. Molly's eyes drifted closed, a smile on her face, and Hannah felt something shift and settle in her chest, a rightness she hadn't known she was searching for. Outside, standing on the porch in the cool evening air, Ethan turned to her with questions in his eyes. "This doesn't mean I'm not scared," Hannah said before he could speak. "It doesn't mean I'm ready for promises or labels or town gossip, but—" She took a breath. "But I'm willing to try, to see if one day could become more." Ethan's hand found hers in the darkness. "That's all I'm asking for, just a chance." They stood together in comfortable silence, and Hannah thought about her mother's words, about choosing life over fear, about writing her own story instead of letting others write it for her. 3 weeks passed in a new rhythm. Hannah came to the ranch twice during the week after school, helping Molly with lessons and staying for dinner. Sundays became tradition, church together as a family, though they sat carefully apart to maintain propriety, then long afternoons at the ranch where Hannah was teaching Molly to bake and Ethan was teaching them both to ride. The town talked, of course. Widow Morrison made pointed comments about the speed of courtship. The Reverend's wife asked careful questions about intentions. But mostly, people seemed pleased, glad to see Ethan emerging from grief, happy for Molly's transformation, approving of the quiet schoolteacher who'd somehow found her way into the Cole family's life. Hannah waited for it to feel like Boston, for the attention to turn threatening, or the whispers to become accusations. Instead, she found herself slowly relaxing into visibility, learning that being seen didn't always mean being judged. Then came the morning everything shattered. Hannah was preparing for school when a knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find a stranger, a well-dressed man with calculating eyes and a smile that made her skin crawl. "Miss Hannah Reed?" he said, though it wasn't really a question. "Or should I say Miss Hannah Pierce? I believe we have some unfinished business to discuss." Her blood turned to ice. The name Pierce was her mother's maiden name, the one Hannah had taken when she fled Boston. The fact that this man knew both names meant only one thing. Her past had found her. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed, her hand tightening on the door frame. "Oh, I think you do." The man's smile widened. "My name is Detective Howard Walsh, Boston Police Department. I've been looking for you for quite some time, Miss Pierce, or Reed, or whatever name you're using these days." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of embezzlement and theft. You're coming back to Boston." The world tilted sideways. Hannah grabbed the doorframe to keep from falling, her mind racing. This couldn't be happening, not now, not when she'd finally found something worth staying for. "There's been a mistake," she said, but her voice shook. I didn't steal anything. Mr. Pemberton has provided substantial evidence of your crimes. Ledgers with your handwriting, bank records showing deposits to accounts in your name, testimony from witnesses who saw you accessing confidential files. Walsh's expression held false sympathy. It doesn't look good for you, Miss Pierce. But if you come quietly, cooperate fully, perhaps the court will show leniency. I need time, Hannah said desperately. I need to arrange things here, my position at the school. You have until tomorrow morning. I've taken a room at the boarding house and will collect you at 8 o'clock. If you're not there, he let the threat hang unfinished. Well, I'd hate for this pleasant little town to learn they've been harboring a fugitive. I'm sure your reputation here would suffer terribly. He tipped his hat and left, and Hannah closed the door on shaking legs before collapsing against it. Her carefully built life was crumbling, the past she'd run from finally catching up to destroy everything she'd found. She couldn't go to school, couldn't face Molly's innocent questions or maintain the pretense that everything was fine. Instead, she spent the day packing with numb efficiency, her mind circling around impossible choices. She could run again, take what money she had left and disappear before morning, start over somewhere new. But that meant abandoning her students, her mother, and Ethan and Molly, leaving them to wonder what happened, to fill in the silence with hurt and confusion. Or she could go back to Boston and face charges she couldn't prove false. Let Marcus destroy her publicly, spend years in prison for crimes she didn't commit, lose everything anyway. Neither option offered hope. As afternoon faded to evening, a knock sounded. Hannah opened the door to find Ethan, his expression tight with worry. You weren't at school, he said without preamble. Molly came home crying because you weren't there. What's wrong? Hannah tried to speak and couldn't. The dam broke and tears streamed down her face, all the fear and grief and desperate love she'd been holding back flooding out at once. Ethan stepped inside and gathered her into his arms, and she clung to him while everything fell apart. Tell me, he said quietly, his hand steady on her back. Whatever it is, tell me. So she did. All of it. Marcus and the embezzlement, the accusations, fleeing before trial, the detective who'd found her and the warrant that would drag her back to face charges she couldn't fight. When she finished, Ethan's arms had tightened around her, but his voice stayed calm. You're not going back alone, he said. Hannah pulled back to look at him. Ethan, you can't. I can and I will. If you're going to Boston, I'm going with you. We'll hire a lawyer, fight these charges properly. You said there were ledgers, evidence? Then there has to be a way to prove the truth. You don't understand. Marcus's family has money and influence. No one will believe me over them. Then we'll make them believe you. His jaw set with determination. You're not doing this alone, Hannah. Not anymore. But Molly would want her father to fight for someone he stopped, swallowed hard. Someone who matters to us. And we'll come back. All of us. Together. The hope in his words felt dangerous and impossible and completely necessary. Hannah looked into his face and saw something she'd been afraid to name. Not just affection or attraction or gratitude, but real, deep, impossible love. I'm so scared, she whispered. I know, Ethan said, but you don't have to be scared alone. That night, with Molly sleeping peacefully in her bed and Ethan sitting across from Hannah at the kitchen table making plans, something fundamental shifted. This wasn't borrowed time anymore. This wasn't pretending or transaction or careful protection. This was real. Messy and terrifying and completely, irrevocably real. And tomorrow, they would face whatever came. Together. Morning came too quickly, the sun rising over mountains that seemed indifferent to the crisis unfolding below them. Hannah sat at her small table with coffee gone cold in her cup, watching the light creep across the floor while Ethan made arrangements with a speed that would have been impressive if it weren't so terrifying. He'd sent word to his neighbor to watch the cattle, arranged for Molly to stay with the Reverend's family, and somehow found enough money for 3 train tickets to Boston. His savings, he'd said, meant for emergencies. If this wasn't an emergency, nothing was. I can't let you spend your savings on this, Hannah had protested somewhere around midnight, exhaustion making her voice thin. It's my choice, Ethan had said simply, and I'm making it. Now, with Detective Walsh due to arrive in less than an hour, Hannah moved through her small house like a ghost, touching things she might never see again. Her mother's cameo brooch, the books she'd carefully collected, the curtains she'd sewn herself, trying to make this place feel like home. A knock at the door made her jump, but it wasn't Walsh, it was Molly, her small face pressed against the glass, Ethan standing behind her with a hand on her shoulder. Hannah opened the door, and Molly rushed in, throwing her arms around Hannah's waist with desperate strength. "Papa told me you have to go away," the child said, her voice muffled against Hannah's dress. "He said bad people are lying about you and you have to go fix it. But you're coming back, right? You promised you'd come back." Hannah's throat closed. She hadn't promised any such thing, had been careful not to make promises she couldn't keep, but looking down at Molly's upturned face, seeing the trust and fear warring in those gray eyes, she found herself making a promise anyway. "I'm coming back," she said, praying it was true. "Your papa and I are going to fix this, and then we're coming home." "To us?" Molly's voice was so small, so hopeful. "You're coming home to us?" Hannah glanced at Ethan over Molly's head. He met her gaze steadily, and she saw the same promise reflected there. Not just that they'd return to Dustvale, but that when they did, they'd be a family, real and whole, and no longer pretending. "Yes," Hannah whispered. "I'm coming home to you." Molly clung tighter, and Hannah held her until Walsh's precise knock sounded at the door. The detective's eyebrows rose when he saw Ethan standing in the room, his expression calculating as he took in the scene. "Mr. Cole," Walsh said, clearly having done his research. "I wasn't aware you'd be accompanying Miss Pierce to Boston." "Miss Reed," Ethan corrected, his voice hard. "And she won't be traveling in your custody. We'll make our own way." "I'm afraid the warrant requires her presence in Boston for trial. It doesn't specify she must travel as your prisoner." Ethan's tone brooked no argument. "We'll be on the afternoon train. You're welcome to verify our tickets if you doubt our intentions." Walsh's jaw tightened, but he was a man who understood when he'd been outmaneuvered. "Very well, but if she doesn't appear—" "She will," Ethan said flatly. "You have my word." After Walsh left, Hannah had only minutes to say goodbye to Molly. The Reverend's wife arrived to collect the child, her kind face full of questions she didn't ask. Molly clung to Hannah one last time, then to her father, extracting promises from both of them that felt like vows. "Be brave, little bird," Ethan said, his voice rough. "Just like your mama." "Which mama?" Molly asked, and the question hung in the air, innocent and devastating and somehow exactly right. "Both of them," Ethan said after a moment, glancing at Hannah. "You're lucky enough to have two." The train journey to Boston took 4 days of rattling rails and sleepless nights. Small towns bleeding into prairie, bleeding into the first hints of Eastern civilization. Hannah and Ethan maintained careful propriety, separate hotel rooms at each stop, never touching beyond what was necessary, but the intimacy between them grew anyway, built from shared meals and whispered plans, from the way Ethan made sure she ate when anxiety killed her appetite, from how Hannah caught him staring at Molly's photograph with an expression that broke her heart. "Tell me about Sarah," Hannah said on the third night, unable to bear the silence anymore. They sat in the dining car watching darkness blur past the windows, and Ethan's hand stilled on his coffee cup. "Why?" "Because she was your wife, because Molly is half her, because if we're—" Hannah stopped, then forced herself to continue. "Because if we're going to be a family, I need to know her too." Ethan was quiet for so long Hannah thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and careful, painting a portrait of a woman who'd loved him despite his rough edges, who'd made their house a home through small acts of beauty, who'd faced death with a courage he still couldn't comprehend. "She knew she was dying for 3 days before the fever took her completely," he said, staring into his coffee. "The doctor told us there was nothing to be done. And in those 3 days, she made me promise things, that I'd keep living, that I'd let Molly be happy, that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life grieving." His voice cracked. "I've broken those promises every day for 2 years. "Until Saturday," Hannah said softly. "Until Saturday," he agreed. "Until you showed up at my door and reminded me what it felt like to want something beyond just getting through another day." He finally met her gaze. "Sarah would have liked you," She always said I needed someone who'd call me on my nonsense. I haven't called you on any nonsense yet. Give it time. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. We've got plenty ahead of us. They arrived in Boston on a gray October afternoon, the city sprawling and bustling in ways that made Dustvale feel like a fading dream. Hannah stepped onto the platform and felt the weight of her past settle over her shoulders like a cloak made of lead. This was where she'd been happy once, where she'd believed in futures that turned to ash, where her name had become synonymous with scandal. Ethan's hand found hers in the crowd, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with steady strength. "Where first?" he asked. "My mother," Hannah said without hesitation. "She needs to know I'm here, and—" She swallowed hard. "I need to see her before everything falls apart again." Her mother's boarding house was in a neighborhood that had seen better days, the kind of place where genteel poverty put on its best face and pretended everything was fine. Hannah climbed the stairs to the second floor with her heart hammering, Ethan a solid presence behind her. The woman who opened the door at Hannah's knock was thinner than Hannah remembered, her hair more gray than brown, but her eyes lit up with such joy that Hannah felt tears spring to her own. "Hannah," her mother breathed. "Oh, my darling girl, you came home." They fell into each other's arms, and Hannah let herself be held like she was still a child needing comfort. When they finally separated, her mother's gaze moved to Ethan with sharp intelligence. "And this must be Mr. Cole," she said, "the man from your letters." "Ma'am." Ethan removed his hat, suddenly looking uncertain. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Any circumstances that bring my daughter back to me are acceptable." She ushered them inside a small room that held a bed, a chair, a table, and little else. "Now, tell me everything." They did. Hannah and Ethan trading off pieces of the story: Walsh's arrival, the warrant, Marcus's supposed evidence, their decision to face it together. Hannah's mother listened with the intensity of someone who'd spent her life reading between lines, and when they finished, her expression had hardened into something Hannah recognized from childhood, the look that meant her mother was preparing for battle. "Marcus Pemberton," she said, the name like poison on her tongue, "has been busy since you left. Did you know he married?" Hannah blinked. "What?" "6 months ago, Catherine Aldridge, the shipping magnate's daughter. Quite the social event." Her mother's smile was sharp. "And quite the financial relief, I imagine, given the rumors about the Pemberton family's recent struggles." Ethan leaned forward. "What kind of struggles?" "The kind that happen when a son embezzles from clients, and the family must cover the losses to avoid scandal. They've sold property, called in debts, made carefully worded statements about market fluctuations." She looked at Hannah. "The Pembertons are barely holding on to respectability. I imagine they can't afford for you to prove your innocence. It would destroy what little they have left." Understanding crashed through Hannah. "He needs me to be guilty. If I prove the truth, his family loses everything." "Exactly. Which means they'll fight dirty to keep you silent." Her mother's hand found Hannah's. "But it also means they're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes." "We need a lawyer," Ethan said, "someone who isn't afraid of the Pemberton name." Hannah's mother smiled. "I know just the person. Daniel Ashford. He was your father's student years ago. Brilliant mind, no patience for injustice, and he owes me a favor. I'll send word tonight." The lawyer arrived the next morning, a man of about 40, with sharp eyes and an air of controlled intensity. He listened to Hannah's story without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting, occasionally asking questions that revealed a mind working 3 steps ahead. "The ledgers are the key," he said when Hannah finished. "If we can prove the handwriting isn't yours, or better yet, that the entries show a pattern inconsistent with how you worked, we might have a case. But I'll be honest, Miss Reed, this won't be easy. The Pembertons have influence, and public opinion is already against you." "I don't care about public opinion," Hannah said. "I care about the truth." Ashford's smile was approving. "Good, because we're going to need to be ruthless if we want to win this." The trial was set for 2 weeks away, which gave them precious little time to build a defense. Ashford worked like a man possessed, tracking down witnesses, subpoenaing records, finding every crack in Marcus's carefully constructed lies. Hannah spent long days in his office, going through old correspondence, providing samples of her handwriting, explaining accounting procedures until her voice went hoarse. Ethan stayed beside her through all of it, a steady anchor in the chaos. At night, they'd return to the modest hotel where they'd taken rooms, and Hannah would find him sitting in the lobby waiting for her, his presence a reminder that she wasn't alone anymore. "You should go home," she told him one evening, watching him fight exhaustion. "Molly needs you. The ranch needs you. You don't have to stay here." "Yes, I do." He looked at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "We're in this together, remember? Besides, I made a promise to a 5-year-old girl that we'd both come home. I intend to keep it." The words settled around Hannah's heart like a benediction. She reached across the small table between them and took his hand, and they sat together in the hotel lobby while the city rushed past outside, two people from Montana Territory holding on to each other while the world tried to tear them apart. A week before the trial, Ashford made a breakthrough. One of Marcus's former clerks, a young man named Thomas Wright, who'd been dismissed under mysterious circumstances, agreed to testify. He'd kept copies of documents that showed the true pattern of the embezzlement, entries made in Marcus's hand, withdrawn to accounts that benefited Marcus alone, covered up through carefully falsified records. "He was always sloppy," Wright said during their meeting, his hands shaking slightly. "He thought his name protected him, and it did until you ran. Then he needed someone to blame, and I was convenient. But I kept evidence, just in case." "Why didn't you come forward before?" Hannah asked. Wright's laugh was bitter. "Come forward to who? The police are in the Pembertons' pocket. The courts favor old money over working men. I kept my head down and got a new position and tried to forget." He looked at Hannah directly. "But when Mr. Ashford told me what Marcus did to you, blamed you for his crimes, destroyed your life, I couldn't stay silent anymore. Some things matter more than self-preservation." The testimony changed everything. Ashford's confidence grew, and even Hannah began to allow herself the dangerous luxury of hope. Maybe this would work. Maybe she could prove the truth. Maybe she could go home with her name cleared and her future intact. Then, 3 days before the trial, everything fell apart. Hannah was walking back to the hotel alone. Ethan had gone to send a telegram to the Reverend about Molly when a carriage pulled alongside her. The door opened and Marcus Pemberton stepped out, impeccably dressed and smiling like they were old friends meeting by chance. "Hannah," he said warmly, "or should I say Miss Pierce? I've always been confused about which name you prefer." She stopped, her hand tightening on her bag. "Stay away from me, Marcus." "Now, is that any way to greet your former fiancé?" He moved closer, and she saw the calculation in his eyes, the same look he'd worn when he'd accused her of his crimes. "I wanted to discuss a proposition, a way we could resolve this unpleasantness without dragging both our names through the mud." "There's nothing to discuss." "I think there is." His voice dropped, losing its false warmth. "Drop the charges against yourself, leave Boston quietly, and I'll make sure you have enough money to start over somewhere far away. You and that rancher and his motherless child can have a nice life. No trial, no scandal, no risk of prison." "You mean no risk of you being exposed as a thief and a liar?" Marcus's smile thinned. "I mean no risk of me ensuring you spend the next 20 years in prison while your mother dies alone and that rancher realizes he made a terrible mistake choosing you." The threat was clear, and Hannah felt ice slide down her spine. "I'm not running anymore, Marcus, and I'm not letting you destroy another innocent person to save yourself." "Innocent?" Marcus laughed. "You think Wright is innocent? He helped me for years, took his cut of the profits, only turned when I refused to keep paying him off. And that lawyer of yours, Ashford, has his own reasons for hating my family. This isn't about justice, Hannah. It's about people using you to settle their grudges." "You're lying." "Am I? Ask Wright about the deposits made to his account. Ask Ashford about how my father ruined his father's business 20 years ago." Marcus leaned closer. "Everyone has motives, Hannah. Everyone is using you. The only person who was ever honest with you was me, and you threw that away. You accused me of crimes you committed. I protected my family, just like you're trying to protect yours now." His gaze flicked past her. "Speaking of which, how well do you really know Ethan Cole? Did he tell you about the debts on his ranch? About how convenient it would be if his daughter's school teacher had access to money from a settlement or inheritance. Men are practical creatures, Hannah, even the ones who seem noble. You're wrong about him. Am I? Then why is he here spending money he doesn't have on a woman he barely knows? Love. Marcus's laugh was cruel. People like us don't get love, Hannah. We get transactions, and the sooner you accept that, the easier your life will be. He stepped back toward the carriage. You have until tomorrow to accept my offer. After that, I'll make sure the trial destroys you so completely that no one, not your mother, not your rancher, not anyone, will want anything to do with you when it's over. He left, and Hannah stood on the street corner feeling her newfound hope crumble. Not because she believed Marcus's lies about Ethan. She didn't, couldn't, wouldn't. But because she knew Marcus well enough to recognize truth wrapped in manipulation. Wright probably had taken money. Ashford probably had personal reasons for taking her case. And while those facts didn't make her guilty, they would muddy the waters enough that a jury might not see clearly through to the truth. She found Ethan in the hotel lobby, and one look at her face brought him to his feet. What happened? She told him about Marcus, about the offer, about the threats and insinuations. When she finished, Ethan's expression had gone dangerously still. Do you believe him? About Wright and Ashford? I believe there's probably truth mixed with lies, which is how Marcus works. Hannah sank into a chair. And I believe he's desperate enough to do anything to win. Then we fight harder. Ethan knelt in front of her chair, taking her hands. We talk to Ashford, verify the facts, adjust our strategy. We don't give up. Ethan, if we lose, if I go to prison, you need to go home. Take care of Molly. Don't waste your life waiting for me. Stop. His voice was fierce. Don't you dare start planning for failure. Don't you dare push me away to protect me. We're past that, Hannah. We're past pretending this is anything other than what it is. Which is what? Love. The word came out rough, definitive. I love you, completely, terrifyingly, irrevocably, and I'm not going anywhere, whether you're in prison or free, whether this takes months or years. I'm staying. Hannah stared at him, the words she'd been too afraid to say trembling on her tongue. I love you too, she whispered. I've loved you since you danced with me at the harvest gathering and looked at me like I mattered. But Ethan, love isn't enough if love is all we have. He stood, pulling her up with him. Love and truth and the stubbornness to keep fighting even when it seems impossible. That's enough. It has to be enough. That night, they met with Ashford and laid out Marcus's accusations. The lawyer's face tightened, but he didn't deny the personal history. It's true my father and the Pembertons had business dealings that ended badly, he said. And it's true I was pleased to take a case against them. But my personal feelings don't change the evidence, Miss Reed. Wright's testimony is credible because the documents support it, not because of his motivations. But a jury won't see it that way, Hannah said. They'll see a vengeful lawyer and a paid-off clerk and a woman who ran instead of fighting. They'll see what Marcus wants them to see. Then we make sure they see something else. Ashford pulled out his notes. We don't hide the personal histories. We address them directly, own them, and then we bury Marcus under so much evidence that motivation becomes irrelevant. We show pattern, we show opportunity, we show the financial desperation that drove him to steal in the first place. And if it's not enough? Ashford met her gaze steadily. Then we appeal, and we keep appealing until we win or run out of options. But we don't surrender, not to men like Marcus Pemberton. The night before the trial, Hannah couldn't sleep. She stood at her hotel window watching Boston's streets, this city that had once been home and had become a prison, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. Behind her, she heard a soft knock at the door. Ethan stood in the hallway, still dressed despite the late hour. Couldn't sleep either, he said. She let him in, propriety be damned. They sat together on the small sofa, not touching at first, just being present in the same space. Then Hannah leaned against his shoulder and felt his arm come around her, solid and warm. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said quietly, I need you to know something. Being with you and Molly, even for just those few weeks, has been the happiest I've been in my entire life. If this is all we get, it was still worth it. It's not all we get. Ethan's voice was firm. Tomorrow, we go into that courtroom and we fight. We show them who you really are. And then we go home to our daughter and build the life we both deserve. our daughter. The words settled around Hannah's heart, and she realized he was right. Somewhere between pretending and hoping and fighting, they'd become a family. Not the careful, structured kind built on arrangements and expectations, but the messy, complicated, real kind built on choice and love and stubborn determination to not let go. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "So am I." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. "But we're terrified together. And that makes all the difference." They stayed like that until dawn broke over Boston. Two people from Montana Territory holding each other against the uncertainty of what the day would bring, finding strength in proximity and shared determination and the kind of love that doesn't run from fear but faces it hand in hand. When morning came, Hannah dressed in her best dress, pinned her mother's cameo at her throat, and walked into the courthouse with Ethan on one side and her mother on the other. The courtroom was packed. Society matrons come to witness scandal, reporters eager for sensational stories, and the Pemberton family sitting in the front row like royalty attending an execution. Marcus sat at the prosecutor's table, perfectly composed, his new wife beside him, in silent support. When his gaze met Hannah's, he smiled, confident, cruel, certain of victory. Hannah lifted her chin and smiled back, and in that moment, she wasn't the frightened girl who'd fled Boston in disgrace. She was a woman who'd crossed a continent, built a new life, found love in unexpected places, and learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand your ground and fight for the truth. The bailiff called the court to order, and Hannah took her seat beside Ashford. The battle for her future, for their future, was about to begin. The judge was a severe-looking man with iron gray hair and eyes that revealed nothing, the kind of face that had heard every lie and every truth and had learned to weigh them with equal skepticism. He surveyed the packed courtroom with obvious distaste for the spectacle, then nodded to the prosecutor to begin. The Commonwealth's case unfolded exactly as Hannah had feared. The prosecutor painted her as a social climber who'd seen an opportunity and taken it, a woman of modest means who'd gained Marcus Pemberton's trust only to betray it. He presented ledgers with entries he claimed matched her handwriting, bank statements showing deposits to accounts allegedly in her name, testimony from Pemberton family servants who swore they'd seen her accessing confidential files late at night. "Miss Pierce," the prosecutor said, emphasizing the name she'd abandoned, saw a chance to secure her future at the expense of the man who'd offered her everything, his name, his protection, his love. And when her scheme was discovered, she fled like the criminal she is, leaving destruction in her wake. It was a compelling narrative, made more so by Marcus's appearance on the stand. He played his role perfectly. The wounded fiancé, the dutiful son trying to protect his family's reputation, the man who'd loved unwisely and paid the price. His voice broke at precisely the right moments. His pauses were timed for maximum effect, and when he looked at Hannah across the courtroom, his expression held just the right blend of sorrow and accusation. "I trusted her completely," Marcus said, his hand pressed to his chest as if the betrayal still pained him. "I shared everything with her, my work, my family's business, my future plans. I believed we would build a life together. Instead, she used that trust to steal from the very people I was sworn to protect." "And when you discovered the theft?" the prosecutor prompted. "I confronted her, showed her the evidence, begged her to return what she'd taken and seek help." Marcus's voice dropped to a pained whisper. "Instead, she accused me, tried to turn everything around to make me the villain in her story, and before I could stop her, she disappeared." The jury was riveted. Hannah watched their faces and saw belief taking root, saw her future narrowing with each word Marcus spoke. Beside her, Ashford took notes with quick, sharp strokes, his expression giving nothing away. When it was Ashford's turn to cross-examine, he stood slowly, letting silence settle over the courtroom before he spoke. "Mr. Pemberton, you paint a touching picture of betrayed love. Tell me, when did you marry Miss Catherine Aldridge?" Marcus blinked at the shift in topic. 6 months ago. I don't see what that has to do with 6 months after Miss Pierce fled Boston. That seems quite fast for a man nursing a broken heart, doesn't it? I found comfort in Catherine's company. Our families have been close for years. I'm sure the fact that her father's shipping fortune could shore up your family's failing finances had nothing to do with it, Ashford said mildly. The prosecutor objected, The judge sustained it, but the seed was planted. Ashford moved on smoothly. You claim Miss Pierce had access to confidential client files. As an unmarried woman with no official position in your firm, how exactly did she gain this access? I trusted her. I allowed her into my office. Into your locked office, where you kept sensitive documents? You gave her a key? Marcus hesitated, realizing the trap. She found ways. She picked locks? Broke into safes? Or perhaps these files were never as secure as you claim, because you needed easy access to them yourself for purposes that had nothing to do with Miss Pierce. The objection came again, but Ashford had made his point. He pressed harder, walking Marcus through the timeline of the alleged thefts, pointing out inconsistencies in dates and amounts, noting that several of the supposed incidents occurred when Hannah had been documented as being elsewhere, at her mother's bedside during an illness, attending a wedding in New York, teaching at a school for working-class children. Convenient that the thefts aligned so poorly with Miss Pierce's actual whereabouts, don't you think? Ashford asked. By the time Marcus left the stand, his composure had cracked slightly, sweat visible on his brow despite the cool courtroom air. But the damage to Hannah's case had been done, and Ashford's cross-examination, while skillful, hadn't fully undone it. The prosecution rested, and Ashford called his first witness, Thomas Wright, the former clerk. Wright took the stand with obvious nervousness, his hands gripping the rail in front of him. Mr. Wright, you worked for the Pemberton firm for how long? 3 years, sir, until I was dismissed 8 months ago. And during that time, what were your duties? I managed the books for client accounts, tracked deposits and withdrawals, maintained ledgers. Wright's voice grew steadier as he spoke about familiar territory. I worked directly under Mr. Pemberton's supervision. Did you ever see Miss Pierce access these ledgers? No, sir. Women weren't allowed in the accounting offices. It wasn't proper. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Ashford let it settle before continuing. But you did see someone else making irregular entries, didn't you? Wright nodded, his jaw tightening. Mr. Pemberton. He'd come in after hours, sometimes very late, and make entries himself. When I asked about them, he said they were corrections or special arrangements with certain clients. He told me not to question it. Did you question it anyway? Eventually, when the amounts grew larger and the explanations grew thinner. Wright pulled papers from his jacket with shaking hands. I kept copies. Insurance, I thought, in case something went wrong. Ashford took the documents and had them entered into evidence, then walked right through them. Entries in Marcus's handwriting, withdrawals to accounts that benefited Marcus directly, a pattern of theft that had been ongoing for years before Hannah had even met him. The prosecution's cross-examination was brutal, painting Wright as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge, suggesting he'd falsified the documents, implying he'd been complicit in the thefts himself. Wright weathered it with visible strain, his credibility damaged but not destroyed. Then Ashford called Hannah to the stand. She rose on unsteady legs, feeling every eye in the courtroom on her as she crossed to the witness box. The bailiff swore her in, and she placed her hand on the Bible and promised to tell the truth, thinking of how many times truth had failed to protect her in this city. Ashford's questions were gentle, designed to let her tell her story in her own words. She spoke about meeting Marcus, about believing she loved him, about the slow realization that something was wrong with his accounts. She described finding the discrepancies, confronting him, and his immediate pivot to accusing her instead. Why didn't you stay and fight the charges when they were first brought? Ashford asked. Hannah took a breath. Because I was afraid. Because Marcus's family had money and influence, and I had neither. Because I'd seen what happened to people who accused the powerful. They were destroyed, crushed, made into examples. I thought if I ran, I could at least survive. I was wrong. She looked directly at the jury. Running made me look guilty. It let Marcus continue to steal and lie and blame others for his crimes. And it cost me everything I'd built in Boston. So I'm here now, not running anymore, telling the truth, even though it's hard and frightening and might not be enough. The sincerity in her voice carried across the courtroom. She saw some of the jurors shift, saw doubt creeping into expressions that had been certain. The prosecutor's cross-examination was vicious. He attacked her flight, her name change, her relationship with Ethan, calling it proof of an unstable character, suggesting she'd manipulated another man for security and money. Hannah forced herself to remain calm, to answer each accusation with simple truth. "I changed my name to escape a scandal I didn't create," she said. "I built a new life teaching children because I'm qualified and capable. And I fell in love with Mr. Cole because he and his daughter showed me what real family feels like. None of that makes me a thief." "But you did accept money from Mr. Cole, didn't you? 3 months' salary for a single day of pretending to be his wife?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. Hannah felt heat flood her face, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, he hired me to accompany him and his daughter to a town gathering because she was grieving and needed help. I accepted because I needed money for my mother's medical care. But what started as an arrangement became real, and we fell in love honestly. There's no crime in that. Except it suggests a pattern of using people for financial gain. It suggests I'm human. I needed money, yes. But I earned it honestly, and I gave something real in return. Care for a child who was hurting, companionship for a man who was lonely. We helped each other. That's not manipulation. That's what people do when they care about each other." She looked at Ethan as she spoke, saw him sitting in the gallery with his hands clenched tight, his eyes blazing with pride and fury and love. That look gave her strength for the rest of the brutal questioning. When she finally stepped down, she felt wrung out and uncertain. Ashford called character witnesses, her former students from Boston, neighbors who testified to her integrity, even the headmistress of the school where she'd taught, who swore Hannah was incapable of the crimes alleged. But the Pemberton family countered with their own witnesses, society matrons who testified to Hannah's social climbing, former servants who claimed to have seen suspicious behavior, a parade of Boston's elite who closed ranks around one of their own. The trial lasted 3 days. 3 days of testimony and counter-testimony, of evidence presented and challenged, of two competing narratives fighting for dominance. On the morning of the 4th day, both sides rested their cases, and the judge sent the jury to deliberate. Hannah sat in the hallway outside the courtroom with Ethan and her mother, the wait stretching into hours. Other cases were called and resolved while theirs hung in limbo, 12 strangers deciding her fate behind closed doors. "Whatever happens," her mother said, gripping Hannah's hand, "I'm proud of you. You stood up. You fought. That takes courage I'm not sure I could have found." "You gave me that courage," Hannah said. "You taught me to run when I needed to survive, and you taught me to fight when it mattered more than survival." Ethan said nothing, just sat with his shoulder pressed against hers, solid and present, and refusing to leave even when the wait stretched past dinner and into evening. Finally, as the sun was setting and Hannah had nearly given up hope for a verdict that day, the bailiff emerged. "Jury's back." They filed into the courtroom with the rest of the spectators. The jury looked tired, some faces drawn with the weight of what they'd decided. Hannah searched their expressions for clues and found none. The foreman stood when the judge asked if they'd reached a verdict. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of embezzlement, how do you find?" The pause before the answer felt eternal. Hannah gripped Ethan's hand so tightly she thought her bones might crack. "Not guilty." The courtroom exploded, gasps and shouts and the crack of the judge's gavel demanding order. Hannah couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process what she'd just heard. "On the charge of theft, how do you find?" "Not guilty." She was crying, she realized distantly. Tears streaming down her face while Ethan pulled her into his arms and her mother sobbed with relief, and Ashford allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Across the courtroom, Marcus sat frozen, his face white with shock and fury. The judge dismissed the jury with thanks, then turned his attention to the courtroom at large. "Before this court is dismissed, I have something to say." His voice cut through the chaos, demanding silence. "The evidence presented in this case has raised serious questions about the initial investigation and the charges brought against Miss Reed. I am therefore ordering a formal inquiry into the Pemberton firm's accounting practices and Mr. Marcus Pemberton's handling of client funds. Furthermore," he looked directly at Marcus, "Mr. Pemberton, you are hereby ordered to remain in Boston and make yourself available for questioning. Should you attempt to leave the jurisdiction, I will issue a warrant for your arrest. Am I clear?" Marcus nodded stiffly, his world crumbling around him. The judge's gavel came down one final time. This court is adjourned. Hannah stumbled out of the courtroom in a daze, surrounded by well-wishers and reporters shouting questions. Ashford navigated them through the crowd to a private room where they could catch their breath. "It's over," Hannah said, the words not quite real. "It's actually over." "The trial is over," Ashford corrected. "Marcus will likely face his own charges now. The investigation will take months, maybe years, but for you, yes. You're free. Cleared of all charges, your name restored." Hannah looked at her mother, then at Ethan, then back at the lawyer who'd fought for her when she had nothing to offer but truth. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for everything he'd done. "I can never repay you for this." "You already have." Ashford's smile was genuine. "Justice served as payment enough. Now go home to Montana Territory and build that life you've been fighting for." That night, they celebrated quietly in her mother's small room, the three of them and Ashford sharing wine and bread, and the profound relief of a nightmare ended. Her mother looked stronger already, the specialist treatments working, hope returning color to her face. "Come back with us," Hannah said impulsively. "To Dustvale. We have room and clean air, and you shouldn't be alone here anymore." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure? I don't want to impose." "Your family," Ethan said firmly. "And family doesn't impose. They belong." So it was decided. They'd leave Boston together, all three of them, plus the life Hannah had rebuilt from ashes. They'd go home to Montana Territory, to a ranch that needed filling, and a child who needed her grandmother, and a future that suddenly seemed full of impossible possibility. The train journey back felt different than the journey out. Hannah watched the eastern cities give way to prairie, with something like joy instead of dread, each mile taking her further from a past that no longer had power over her and closer to a future she'd chosen instead of fled into. Her mother dozed against the window while Ethan read a week-old newspaper, and Hannah let herself simply exist in the moment, free, cleared, loved, and going home. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked, setting down the paper. "That I can't wait to see Molly's face when we arrive. That I hope she forgives us for being gone so long. That I have no idea how to be a mother, but I want to try anyway." Hannah leaned against his shoulder. "That I love you. That this still doesn't feel entirely real. It's real." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. "We're real. And we're going to spend the rest of our lives proving it." They arrived in Dustvale on a golden afternoon in late autumn, the mountains vivid against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The Reverend's wife had gotten word of their arrival and met them at the station with Molly, who stood on the platform scanning every face until she spotted them. "Papa, Miss Reed!" She launched herself at them with enough force to make Hannah stumble, her small arms wrapping around both of them simultaneously. "You came back! You both came back like you promised!" Hannah knelt down and pulled Molly close, breathing in the scent of her hair, sunshine and sage and something indefinably sweet. "We promised, didn't we? And we always keep our promises to you." "Always," Ethan confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. Molly pulled back to look at Hannah's face, her gray eyes searching. "Does this mean you're staying? For real this time? Not just for one day?" Hannah glanced at Ethan, saw him nod slightly, then looked back at the child she'd come to love as her own. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm staying, if you'll have me." "Yes!" Molly shrieked, loud enough to startle birds from nearby trees. "Yes, yes, yes! You're going to be my mama for real!" "Actually," Ethan said, crouching down beside them, "there's something we need to ask you first, little bird. Something important." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. When had he bought that? Hannah's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small sapphire. "Hannah Reed, you've already given me back my life and my daughter's happiness. You've shown me what it means to be brave enough to fight for the truth and foolish enough to love despite every reason not to. Will you marry me? Will you be Molly's mother and my wife and make this family complete?" The platform seemed to hold its breath. Hannah looked at the ring, then at Molly's hopeful face, then at Ethan's eyes full of love and certainty and promise. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, "Yes, to all of it, yes." Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger while Molly cheered and jumped and generally caused a scene that would be the talk of Dustvale for weeks. Hannah's mother emerged from the train wiping her eyes, and even the Reverend's wife was crying. And suddenly there were people everywhere, neighbors and students and townsfolk who'd heard about the trial and the verdict and had come to welcome them home. That evening, the ranch felt different. Hannah's mother settled into the spare room, already making plans for curtains and herb gardens. Molly insisted on showing Hannah everything that had happened while they were gone. The new foal born to the mare, the addition she'd made to her drawing collection, the way she'd kept Hannah's desk at school neat in case she needed it when she returned. After Molly was finally tucked into bed, Hannah and Ethan stood on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, their shadows long and intertwined. "I never thought I'd have this again," Ethan said quietly. "A full house, voices in the evening, someone to share the weight of the days with. Sarah would have liked you. She'd have been glad I found you." "I hope so," Hannah said. "I'm not trying to replace her. I could never—" "You're not replacing her. You're adding to what she started. Loving Molly, loving me. It doesn't diminish what Sarah and I had. It just means love is bigger than I thought. Big enough for memories and futures both." Hannah leaned into his warmth, this man who'd hired her for one day and ended up giving her a lifetime. "When should we get married?" "Tomorrow if you want. Or we could wait. Do it properly with a church full of people and your mother crying in the front row." "I want Molly to be part of it. And my mother. And I want it to feel real, not rushed." She thought for a moment. "Christmas? That gives us time to plan something small but meaningful." "Christmas," Ethan agreed. "I'll talk to the Reverend tomorrow." The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of preparation and adjustment. Hannah officially resigned from her teaching position. The school board was scandalized until Ethan pointed out that a married woman's place was in the home anyway, which made them nod approvingly even as Hannah rolled her eyes at the backwards logic. A new teacher was hired, a young man from Denver who seemed competent, if uninspired. Hannah's mother threw herself into wedding preparations with an energy that suggested the specialist treatments were working miracles. She sewed Hannah a dress in cream-colored silk, simple and elegant, with lace at the collar that had been her own mother's. Molly appointed herself chief decorator, filling the house with pine boughs and ribbon and drawings of the family they were becoming. The town's initial curiosity about Hannah's trial gave way to acceptance and even celebration. Widow Morrison remained frosty, but most people seemed genuinely pleased that Ethan had found happiness again. The scandal of how they'd met, the arrangement, the pretending, became a romantic story instead of a shameful one, the kind of tale people told at dinner parties with knowing smiles. On Christmas morning, the small church was filled with everyone who mattered. Hannah's mother sat in the front row beside the Reverend's wife, both of them crying before the ceremony even started. Students from Hannah's brief teaching tenure filled several pews, their faces bright with excitement. Neighbors and friends, and even a few strangers who'd heard the story and wanted to witness the ending. Molly walked down the aisle first, scattering flower petals with serious concentration, her dress the same cream as Hannah's. Then Hannah followed, her arm linked through her mother's, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Ethan waited at the altar in his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes locked on her with an intensity that made everything else fade. When she reached him, he took her hands and didn't let go through the entire ceremony. The Reverend spoke about love and commitment, about second chances, and the grace that lets people begin again. He talked about how family isn't always about blood, but about choice and care and showing up even when it's hard. And when he finally pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared felt like a promise kept and a future claimed. At the reception in the church hall, Molly tugged on Hannah's dress until she bent down. "Are you my real mama now?" the child whispered. "If you want me to be," Hannah said. "I'll never replace the mama you had before, but I can be another mama who loves you just as much. Is that okay?" Molly considered this with the seriousness she brought to important matters. "I think people can have more than one mama," she decided, "just like they can have more than one story. The story where mama died is true, but the story where you came and stayed is true too. Both stories are mine." The wisdom of it nearly undid Hannah. She pulled Molly into her arms and held her tight, this child who understood more about love and loss than most adults ever learned. Both stories are yours, she agreed, and we're going to keep writing new ones together. That night, after the celebration had ended and the guests had gone home, Hannah stood in what was now her bedroom, hers and Ethan's, and marveled at how far she'd come. From Boston society to frontier ranch, from accused criminal to beloved wife, from running scared to standing firm. Ethan came up behind her, his arms circling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Terrified," Hannah admitted. "What if I'm not good enough at this? What if I make mistakes? What if—" "You'll make mistakes," Ethan interrupted. "So will I. So will Molly. That's what families do. They make mistakes and forgive each other and keep trying anyway." He turned her to face him. "But you'll be good enough, Hannah. You already are." Through the wall, they heard Molly singing softly to herself, the lullaby Hannah had taught her weeks ago. The sound of it, contentment and security and childish joy, was the sweetest thing Hannah had ever heard. "One day," she said wonderingly. "This all started with one day of pretending." "Best arrangement I ever made," Ethan said, pulling her close. "Even if you did refuse half the payment." "I took what mattered." Hannah smiled against his chest. "I took you and Molly and a chance at something real. That was worth more than any amount of money." "Still is," Ethan agreed. They stood together in the lamplight, two people who'd found each other through desperation and need, and one impossible request. What had started as a transaction, a day of pretending in exchange for money and hope, had become something neither of them could have anticipated. Real love, real family, real belonging that had nothing to do with performance or arrangement and everything to do with choice. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the ranch in white silence. Inside, Hannah Cole, no longer Reed, no longer Pierce, but finally and completely herself, listened to her daughter sing and felt her husband's heartbeat against her cheek and knew she was home. Not the home she'd lost in Boston, and not even the home she'd built in Dustvale as a lonely schoolteacher, but the home she'd found in the space between fear and courage, between running and staying, between one day of pretending and a lifetime of truth. The kind of home you don't discover by accident, but build deliberately through small acts of bravery and large acts of love. The kind that starts with a desperate proposal on a stranger's doorstep and ends with 3 people, 4, counting Sarah's memory that blessed them still, creating something beautiful from broken pieces. Morning would bring ordinary challenges, cattle to tend, a child to raise, a mother to care for, a marriage to nurture through all the complications that real life demanded. But for tonight, Hannah let herself simply rest in the extraordinary gift of being exactly where she belonged, with exactly the people who mattered, living exactly the story she'd chosen to write. One day had become forever, and it was enough.